is on beat. All right, we're back in business.
Okay, we're good now?
Yes, sir.
All right, well, let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. Let's see, for a roll call, let's see, shall I do a verbal roll call then, Lynn?
Yeah, go ahead, and then those that are on, please reply yes or present.
Okay, all right. Caitlin Hedberg? I don't think Caitlin's on. Lindsay Hobson?
Present.
Tasha?
Here.
Lindy?
I'm here.
Jonathan?
Here.
Carla?
Present.
And Jimmy?
Present.
Oh, and I didn't name Alyssa. Sorry, Alyssa is not here, I believe, right?
Yeah, she's excused.
Yep. Okay. Very good, very good. Does everyone have a second to look over the agenda? And if so, I would entertain a motion to approve.
This is Tasha. I move to approve the agenda.
All right, is there a second?
Jimmy, I second.
Excellent. Unless there's any objection, I think we can move on. We don't have any action items on our agenda at this moment. But I think we can go ahead and jump into our reports. First one up, I think I saw that Andy was on the line. Andy, do you want to give us an update from ASD? Are you on there, Andy?
I think we saw him on. Andy, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Let's see.
No, he's there. We're looking at him. He's on mute.
Oh, or he doesn't have his audio connected. Yeah, he doesn't have an audio thing next to him.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. It wasn't saying I was on mute. I was trying to use a headset because I'm having some construction in my house. So you'll hear some banging in the background. Anyway, my name is Andy Ratliff. I'm the director of the Office of Management and Budget for the school district. Thank you guys for moving me up in the agenda today. I've got to get into some union negotiations here shortly, so I'll say my spiel and log off here in 20 minutes or so. For Anchorage, we're with the district really trying to still work out what school might look like in the fall and get our usage of the CARES Act money approved. The board is expected to accept our grant award with a kind of a preliminary idea of what's going to go into that grant tomorrow at their special meeting. And for your benefit, that what we're putting in there is we're adding back health teachers. We are funding or partially funding a 1-to-1 device-to-student ratio with Chromebooks for grades 3 through 12. And then we'll have money in there for online course development, summer school, some PPE, and then we have money in there for charter schools, their allocated portion, and the allocated portion that we're required to give private schools. And we really don't know what they're going to spend their money on yet. They're really kind of deciding that now, but I suspect it'll be similar to the district in their spending on PPE and Chromebooks. So that's just kind of a broad overview. They'll be approving that tomorrow. If you're interested, today at 3 o'clock, I believe the superintendent is holding some press conference or Facebook Live to kind of give an outline of what school start might look like. And then I believe we'll go into a little more detail tomorrow and then review it again at the school board meeting on July 21st. Aside from that, the district is really just trying to close out our fiscal year, get our payroll closed out, our AP closed out, try to get our financial statements prepared in a timely fashion. This whole pandemic is going to put a wrench in that, but we expect to be on time again this year. Aside from that, I don't really have a whole lot else that would be beneficial for the group, but if you have any questions, happy to answer them.
Thanks, Andy. Let's see. I see that Tasha has her hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. We had our community council meeting last night, and some things came up, like what if we have teachers that are concerned because they have at-risk family members at home, and so they can't go back to work in the traditional fashion if the school is open. And then, watching the national news, there's been, the teachers union talking about just not feeling safe going back to work. And I was just curious how that has played into any of the conversations and how that might affect our budget if we have to hire additional staff or do more online work. Just, do we have any idea how that'll impact the budget if we need to change things from, we know it's probably not going to be a traditional school day 5 days a week, but the real impacts on the budget. I feel like it's really hard to try to navigate that, but just curious what you guys have considered.
Right, and we know that'll be an issue coming forward with the folks who don't feel comfortable coming back to work due to their own health conditions or health conditions of someone in the family. I think there will be some opportunities because of the amount of students that may want to come back in a virtual setting versus in school, because students, and parents also have that same concern about sending their students back. So we're going to need a number of teachers to conduct these virtual classes that they are developing now. So I would suspect that at least some of those teachers that are having those concerns could do the virtual learning from home. And then, if we go to 2 days a week, splitting up the classes, like half kids go Monday, Tuesday, half the kids go Thursday, Friday. And then, we would need far fewer teachers just due to not having the necessary prep time that's required in the contract for 5 days a week. So I think there's opportunities to shift folks around to be able to accommodate some of them, but to the extent that that gets requested, they can all be accommodated. I really don't know. But our biggest concern at this point is how many kids actually show up in the fall. For just kind of planning purposes, for you guys, it's every 100 kids equals about $1 million for us. So if we lose 1,400 kids that don't come back in the fall, that's $14 million. So that's, I think, our biggest concern is around who's going to show up more than having to kind of work out these issues with the teachers' unions and whoever can and can't come back to work for one reason or another.
Thank you, Andy. Let's see, other questions for him on school district stuff? Let's see, I am not... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, through the chair. Andy, I believe that number of students is on a specific testing day. Is that correct?
Are you referring to like doing 2 days a week?
No. In terms of like the student body count, it happens on one specific day. I think you had mentioned at one point.
It happens over 20 days, in the first 20 days of October.
Okay, gotcha. And is there any way that, from like the federal level, are they contemplating or recalculating? I guess they're pushing to have schools open at this point, but is there any precedent for having some kind of alternative metric?
Well, each state funds differently, so it's not really a federal federal calculation. It's a state of Alaska's calculation. Like a lot of states do it, where they'll fund the next year based on the previous year's enrollment, so you know what's you can plan better, I guess. Alaska funds based on what's in the current, who comes in the current year, and then adjust your funding in April, May, and June versus what you actually projected. But there was talk, we had requested from the state, or at least to look at the possibility of funding us at the same levels that they did for the current year, just because we, for planning purposes anyway, because we really just don't know who's going to show up. I don't know if that's something they're seriously considering or not, but that would be one possibility, is just to fund all the districts at the same level, or at least at a minimum of what they received in FY20.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks a lot.
Anyone else then for questions for Andy? Okay. not seeing anything, but thanks for the updates, and always appreciate having you here. Let's move on. The next item on our agenda, and the next two items on our agenda are actually kind of two major topics for BAC, and that are also becoming in some ways even more interrelated, or potentially interrelated, the use of the federal CARES funding and the use of the alcohol tax proceeds. So, Lance, who are we having address the federal CARES funding update?
I've asked Jason Buckinstead, the mayor's chief of staff, to share some of the information that was shared with the assembly last week. So I spoke with Jason earlier today. He's got, I think, some material that he'd like to share with us if Jason's on.
Yeah, Jason, are you? Yeah, I saw your name on there. Are you ready to take it away for us?
I am, so let me try to share my screen, and we'll run through it.
We can see it, Jason.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you. As Lance said, my name is Jason Buckinstead. I think I've met most of you, but I am the mayor's chief of staff, and wanted to just spend a few minutes to go over the proposed ordinance that is going to be before the assembly on Tuesday for the acquisition of a number of properties around town. And as we get into this, I do want to just take a minute to kind of talk a little bit broadly about what the AO would do and why we're proposing it. And mainly we believe we have a real opportunity to really make some transformative change in Anchorage on how we handle and deal with homelessness and our homelessness response system by making some really strategic investments to both stabilize and also quickly house adults without homes. We've worked very closely with the Coalition to End Homelessness and some other partners, and we believe that this proposal to purchase several new buildings really creates or allows us to create a more balanced adult shelter system, including spaces for community resource hub services and additional housing units. And that is just on the homelessness side. And I want to be very clear that the other aspect of this is that one of the facilities in there is a treatment center. And while there are certainly individuals that are experiencing homelessness that would access that treatment center, it is not designed as something that is only for homeless individuals. I think we have long talked that there is a significant need for additional treatment beds and facilities within Anchorage, and that is what we're trying to provide. It's not just for, not going to be just for homeless individuals. So, with that, I'll kind of jump in. What is AO 2020-66? It has been sponsored by Assembly members Zalatel, Constant, and I need to add Felix Rivera has also co-sponsored this. But it's essentially asking for not to exceed $22.5 million to acquire and renovate 4 different properties that I'll go into here. But before I do that, I also want to just kind of take a step back and discuss a little bit why we're doing this as well. So last year, before COVID really hit our community and the world, you could see that between the number of different shelters within Anchorage, we have a bed capacity or shelter capacity of almost 700. Obviously, with COVID and the necessity to provide 6 feet of physical distancing in many of these or all of these shelter locations, we've seen a drastic drop in the capacity that we have in the facilities. And as you can see, just looking at this, we have almost a 400-bed decrease in capacity just because of COVID. So what did that do to us, and why did we start reacting the way we did? Well, we knew we didn't want to have 400 more individuals out on the street. So we moved to try to find locations that were suitable to house and shelter these individuals. And I think, as many of you know, the Ben Boeke and the Sullivan Arena were the locations that were selected. The Boeke, over the last month, has been completely demobilized. We've cleaned it. We've turned it back over to what its intended use is, which is a hockey arena. But we have not been able to do that with the Sullivan Arena yet. So we are still housing a couple hundred individuals at the Sullivan Arena, every single night. One of the things that we have been able to do, though, because I think it's kind of been a all hands on deck to do this, is we've been very successful in setting up a resource hub and providing additional services in the parking lot of the Sullivan Arena. And I will just say that on any typical month, we are successful in, I think, housing about 40 to 50 people as, they come into homelessness, and we move them out into some sort of bridge housing, rapid rehousing, or hopefully into something, more permanent. Just in the last couple of months, though, we've been getting much closer to about 100 individuals, because we've been able to do a much better job of coordinating all of the different entities that are involved in this. And we've learned a lot, and we are very excited to try to apply that moving forward to some of these additional facilities. So that is kind of why we're talking about finding additional capacity in buildings, is because I think all of us recognize that the Sullivan is not a long-term solution, and all of us, I think, would like us to fully get out of the Sullivan and return it back to its intended use, which is, a hockey rink, but also a place for, other events. I will also add that we're spending about $750,000 a month just to operate the Sullivan Arena for this. So it is extremely expensive. It is not efficient, and that is again another reason why we're looking at some additional property acquisition. So again, just really quickly, $22.5 million to acquire 4 properties, and we'll walk through kind of the 4 properties right now. The first is the America's Best Value Inn and Suites. It's on kind of Lakeshore and Spenard Road. We are looking at this as, or I guess let me also say that as we go through this, I think there has been a lot of misinformation out there that we are looking at turning all of these facilities into what many people view as kind of traditional shelter space. And that's not true. The America's Best Value Inn and Suites, we are looking at, because of the design, because of the layout, because of the type of rooms, because of the space, we believe that we have a really good opportunity to turn this particular building into something that is more akin to what the Clare House is on Spenard Road, where it's bridge housing, it's potentially some sort of permanent supportive housing where individuals have been able to receive help to get into something more permanent. At that point, on the permanent supportive housing side, we'd be looking at, these individuals wouldn't be able to just kind of live for free forever. We would be, have a resource hub there that would have services and case managers to help them find, employment if they are unemployed, and that there would be some sort of requirement that they also produce or provide some amount of whatever income that they have coming in towards whatever the rent is there. But this would not be a traditional shelter location as people think about that. It also wouldn't be open just to anyone that comes off of the street. So if somebody is homeless walking down the street and goes, "Oh, I heard America's Best Value Inn is now some sort of housing for homeless individuals. That person would not be able to just walk in the door and say, I want a room. That is still where we would still send those types of individuals to one of the shelter locations around town. This one would be, we'd be working with the individuals, at the shelters through the resource hubs to make sure that we are putting folks into this particular building that can be successful in this type of setting. And then just to run through a little bit of information, the proposed use is transitional living, and I do want to just mention that a lot of the terms that I'm going to use throughout here may not be the traditional terms that people that work in homeless services are typically referring to them as, but these are the terms as they are in our municipal code. So we are trying to tie what we're doing directly to the different and various aspects of our code so that everyone understands what we're doing. So while we are saying under our code this is transitional living, I think most people refer to this as bridge housing or rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing, if we're comparing terms. The other piece that for all of these locations that we are very cognizant of, and if we are successful in giving Assembly support to move forward purchasing these facilities on Tuesday, we would obviously have Robin Ward, our real estate director, very much involved in moving forward, negotiating what is a final purchase and sale price. There would be a lot of due diligence that would still need to be done. It's similar to any individual that is purchasing a house and needs to do some due diligence. We would do the same thing on our end. But while all of that is happening, one of the important pieces that we are going to also be doing is, for all of the locations, is putting together an RFP for each of the locations to say, this is the type of facility that we have, this is what we want to do in the facility, and these are the types of services we want to be provided here. And we will put that RFP out for America's Best Value Inn and Suites and say, who in Anchorage, or I mean, for that matter, anyone that wants to, put some sort of proposal forward, thinks that they can run this. And we would then go through that process of selecting an operator for this location. And then once we have them on, we believe that right around that same time is when we'd likely have a final purchase and sale agreement done, and then we would move together with them in setting up the facility, making renovations that make sense, and how we can help them be the most successful that they can be in turning this facility or all of these facilities online. One of the things that we've, and just for example, one of the things that we are talking about within the RFP is, even though America's Best Value is on Spenard, it's probably one of the busier transit routes within town. There's obviously good bus transportation. We are also very cognizant of the fact that one of the concerns that the community has is it's going to create a lot more individuals walking in and around neighborhoods where they haven't historically seen that. So one of the things that we are talking about in terms of putting an RFP in there is having some sort of, the operator being able to provide some sort of transportation for those individuals that, walk up to this facility and say, I need a place to stay. Well, we're not going to want to just turn them away and say, you're on your own, you have to walk 8 blocks or 12 miles to Brother Francis or some other shelter. We want to be able to say, okay, well, let's sit down, let's talk, let's see what space is available at one of the shelters. And oh, by the way, we'll provide you the transportation to get there so you can get there safely. So these are all things that we're thinking about. We think it will hopefully be very successful in finally getting some really good operators. But, I just wanted to throw kind of that conversation out there on this very first one, but it's going to apply to all of the locations as I move through them in terms of putting out an RFP and doing that type of work.
Hey, Jason, can I interrupt? while we're, as Jason's moving through this, Nolan, I think given the time, as Jason moves through these things, if you guys have questions for Jason, can we hold them until after the second presentation? Because I know that they have some time constraints as well, so I would appreciate the consideration from the members. Thank you.
Yeah, and actually, maybe let's see. And this is obviously a really important presentation. How many slides? How many more slides do you have, Jason?
I only have 3 or 4 more slides. I only have the 3 other locations and then 1 wrap-up slide.
Perfect. Yeah. Let's keep.
Maybe I'll try to run through the rest of them relatively quickly, and then as Lance said, I'm free to stay on until the end and can wait until after Tiffany and others get done with their presentation to answer questions.
Sure. Yeah, we hugely appreciate it. So thanks. Keep going, Jason.
Yeah. So the next one, the one that I think most people, or the one that I would describe as probably being the most traditional shelter-like property acquisition, is the former Alaska Club that's on Tudor and Gamble. Part of what we're looking at here is obviously an overnight or transient shelter, but the other big piece of this is having a fully equipped and staffed daytime engagement center that provides resource. It's a resource hub, but it also gives a place for people to go to hopefully not allow them or not want them to be on street corners or in our green spaces. We want to try to figure out a way that they'll come to this location or the other location where we're looking to provide a daytime engagement center. Proposed use in the short term, the social service facility. Like I said, the daytime engagement center with this facility is something that we believe we can actually turn on relatively quickly because there are not nearly as many renovations needed to provide that. But in the long term, as I said, this would look and feel more like a traditional shelter location. But for us to get to that point, there are some significant renovations that we would need to make to allow that type of facility to operate that way. The biggest one probably being we would need to go in and put sprinklers in the entire building so that there's some fire safety there as well. But there are some other renovations that we would want to do as well. But again, this would involve putting out some sort of RFP, getting an operator, and figuring out a lot of those logistics. And again, just a little map. It's kind of Tudor and Old Seward, but in between Fairbanks and Gamble Street. The next one is the Beans Cafe building down on 3rd and Carlick. It's the building that's right next door to the Brother Francis shelter. We would be looking at purchasing this and turning this location actually into a daytime engagement center. We would not be using it as an overnight shelter. But we do understand and do recognize the need for some sort of daytime engagement center for the individuals that are still going to be staying at the Brother Francis shelter. And again, daytime engagement center involves a whole bunch of things. It's obviously a space for individuals to go, to be able to have breakfast, lunch, but also there will be case management and other client services there to really start engaging with these individuals and trying to figure out what kind of help and support that they need to hopefully move from homelessness into something that is more permanent on the housing side. But again, just a little information, there really won't need to be any changes in either the zoning or the proposed use. It's already a social service facility under our code, and that's how it would remain. And again, a map, I'm assuming most people know where this is, down on 3rd and Carlick. And then the final piece of this puzzle that we're trying to put together, and as I mentioned, is not necessarily related at all to anything homelessness related, but it's the Best Western Golden Lion on 36th and Seward Highway. We were looking at this as a good location for us to open up additional drug and alcohol treatment center that would also have some sort of step-down housing provided to those individuals that have successfully completed the program. I think one of the things that we have learned is that just because you've gone through a treatment program doesn't mean that you have reached the end of the road, and we want to be able to provide continued support for those individuals as they begin to move out into the community again. But again, we'd be looking at providing intensive case management and some sort of transitional housing, step-down housing on the individual's path to recovery. And again, the proposed use would be under our code a palliative care facility that would have more than 26 residents in it. And a piece of this, as I said, I think all of this together is a large puzzle that we were trying to put together, and all of them, in our view, need to move together if we actually want to make some real progress on dealing with a lot of these issues. So while there will be homeless individuals that will obviously need treatment at this center, there are obviously a lot of individuals that are already in housing, but because of addiction issues, might be on the verge of losing that housing, and we don't want to see that. So there's going to be a wide range of individuals that would ultimately, probably benefit from this treatment center, and we believe the layout, the size, and some other things would make this a perfect location. And again, we'd be looking at very quickly after our ability to potentially acquire this, putting out an RFP and getting a provider online that would be able to work collaboratively with us and the community in designing and figuring out what the best way is for us to make renovations and actually make this a very successful program. So again, 36th and the Seward Highway, that's kind of right on the corner. You guys can see that. So very quickly, just to recap, prior to COVID, we had about 700 bed capacity in our shelter. Post-COVID, we're down to about 290, so we're about almost 400 short. What does that look like? The Alaska Club could probably hold somewhere between 125 to 150 individuals. We believe with the America's Best Value Inn, between the rapid rehousing, bridge housing, and permanent supportive housing, that we could put roughly 160 individuals there. But that means we're still a little bit short. So how do we meet that unmet need? And I would say that we have a number of other initiatives that we've already gotten approval from the Assembly on, the biggest one being our Home for Good program, where we will be working with the private sector and our philanthropic partners to provide permanent supportive housing for up to 150 individuals over the next couple of years. So we believe with the purchase and acquisition of these properties and some of the initiatives that we already have approved, that we can fully meet the need that is necessary in this new age of post-COVID homeless services. So, but before I go, one of the other things that I do want to just mention that I'm sure most of you are probably very interested in is, it's one thing for us to be able to purchase and acquire these buildings, but how are we going to pay for the operating costs year in and year out? Because, again, for this to be successful, we're going to need a commitment from this administration, whoever the next administration is, and ongoing support from the Assembly to actually fully fund all of these facilities as we move in. So right now, we believe the annual operating costs that the MOA would ultimately be responsible for is roughly about $7 million a year. Now, let me just say, we don't think we're actually, the municipality is going to be responsible for the full $7 million. And I'll give you a couple of different reasons. One, we've had commitments and support from a lot of our philanthropic partners that are saying, if you guys do this and you guys make this type of commitment, we will help you. And what that looks like, we still don't know, but there have been a lot of discussions and commitment that our partners will provide at least some yearly operating dollars to help us with each of these facilities. The other piece of it is we have been very successful over the years in receiving a number of different federal grants, CDBG and ESG grants within our health department, and each of those grants there are eligible uses for each of those. The ESG one in particular, we can use for housing and sheltering of individuals, and we believe we will continue to be successful in getting some of these grants year in and year out that will go towards offsetting some of this $7 million cost. Now, those two that I have just discussed are not going to be able to cover the full $7 million. So where does the rest come from? And again, I can't tell you how much is going to be the rest, but my guess it will be significantly less than $7 million. The two biggest ones that obviously I think most people know about is the alcohol tax that will be coming online. I think there's been a lot of discussions over the last year that a piece of the alcohol tax would be going towards operating costs of some sort of treatment center or homeless services. So we believe that is an area. And then, as all of you are very well aware, we have now gotten conditional approval from the RCA for the MLMP transaction, and as a result, hopefully by the third or fourth quarter of this year, we will have that transaction completely closed and have a significant deposit into our municipal trust fund, which will then, in essence, year in and year out, kick out a much larger dividend than we are currently receiving. So there are obvious new revenue that we will be able to use to offset some of these operating costs, but I'll just end by saying, it's going to be extremely important for this to be successful that there is a commitment from the community, the administration, and the assembly that we're in this, and that we are all wanting to make real transformative change when it comes to how we handle issues around treatment and homelessness. And it is something that in the past the municipality has not done, and I think this administration in particular is saying we're ready to make that commitment. So with that, I will be happy to answer questions after Tiffany and others get done speaking, but that was all that I had for you guys today.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. I think that's a really excellent overview, and I hope if you could make this PowerPoint available, I think that would be really good, and we'll come back with questions. But our guests to talk about the proceeds from alcohol tax, we've got a group of folks, and I'd like to have each of you that's our guest on this topic introduce yourselves briefly, if you could, before you begin.
Hi there, this is Tiffany Hall. I'm the executive director with Recover Alaska, and I'm just one of the people.
I'm Trevor Stores with Alaska Children's Trust. Don't have a speaking role, but I'm with the group.
Thank you, Trevor.
This is Sarah Cluthy, also with the Alaska Children's Trust. I'm here to support and listen in on the conversation.
Hi everyone, this is Thea. I came in the night we met and for helping support this effort. And we're also working with the Trust on the Crisis Now project, so we're in a bit of a dual role with this presentation today.
And, hi, I'm Katie Baldwin. I am with the Mental Health Trust Authority, and I'm here to support and answer any questions about the Crisis Now model and the Trust Initiative and work in that area.
And this is Anna Brawley with Agnebec, also just supporting the part of the group.
Good. See, is that everyone? Okay. Well, please charge ahead, and thanks for being patient with us.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This is me again with Recover, and apologies for not having my video on. I also have a new baby, and she's very hungry right now, so I will spare you from her mealtime. And I hope you all received the document that we sent ahead of time called the Anchorage Alcohol Tax Revenue, A Theory of Positive Change. I don't know if
We did.
share that on the screen as we want to walk through it, or if y'all just have it, individually. That's fine.
Yeah. Can you share your screen, Tiffany? That'd be a helpful thing for us to see all at the same time.
And maybe Anna can share it on her screen.
Oh, that would be great. I'm such a team's expert. I've been out while everyone else is becoming really, really efficient at online meetings. I was on maternity leave, and so I'm just catching up. So Anna, can you share that document?
Yeah, I will do that right now. And then just let me know to scroll down as we go.
Super. So I'll go ahead and get started. I know we're tight on time. Just to say that Recover Alaska and the Children's Trust, along with a lot of other community partners, is really involved in the alcohol tax campaign was happening and trying to get it passed. And once that happened, then we found a lot of our community partners asking us to please stay involved in the whole process of determining how the revenue should be spent. And you know that the Assembly also passed a resolution talking about how they wanted to involve subject matter experts as well as town halls and the administration. And so this is all just an effort to try to get a lot of subject matter experts together and get some solidified recommendations out of a much larger group, just as kind of an effort to assist the Assembly and administration with making these decisions. And it very quickly grew. We started by inviting everyone who had been involved in the campaign, which is about 100 people, but they quickly shared it with more folks. And we wanted to make sure that we were inviting a lot of diverse community members, people with lived experience, people who work in equity, people who maybe aren't usually at the table, but who would have a lot to offer this work. And it quickly grew to a list of almost 250 people being involved in these meetings. And we just started about 3.5 weeks ago. And so it's a little bit of a rushed process because we're trying to keep up with the Assembly timeline. And so, we're kind of doing the best that we can in terms of incorporating all of these views and thoughts and getting all of this really great feedback and moving at a pretty quick rate. And so I also will just preface this to say, I think at your last meeting I said we hope to have specific recommendations at this time, but we're not quite to that level just yet. We had a meeting today and 2 meetings yesterday to check specific recommendations of dollar amounts, but for today we'll mostly be sharing this framework in which we are operating, and very soon, hopefully, kind of via email, we can give some more specific dollar recommendations. So, scroll down, please, Anna. So we started with a vision of improved safety and well-being for all in Anchorage. We talked through that and talked about the various meanings of safety and the various meanings of well-being and the various meanings of health, and wanting to make sure that not only are we thinking about business members and visitors and people in homes, but also thinking of how we can make sure to think about safety and well-being for people who are houseless, or people who are in crisis, or people who are have various other issues. And so we have this long list of goals, some of which are very direct correlations to the ballot language for the alcohol tax, in terms of reducing rates of sexual assault, domestic violence, child maltreatment, folks in homelessness, people with substance use disorders and increasing their access. But we also wanted to make sure to include, addressing race-based disparities and going a little bit more upstream, addressing poverty and suicide, because we know that all of these things are very intertwined, and that best way to address any one of them is by trying to address all of them. And we know that's a really tall order, and we're just doing the best we can, and it's really exciting to see how much energy has been around that people are putting toward this kind of process. In terms of our guiding principles, and but luckily you have the documents, you can look at it more in depth at a later date. But in terms of the guiding principles, again, we want to make sure to engage with people who are living in these situations right now with experience, as well as subject matter experts. And we want to really make sure to address root causes and not just kind of immediate prevention today. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Another thing that we always have an eye toward is leveraging from other investors, other funding sources, and we try to figure out how to really stretch these dollars and those dollars. And then another thing that has come up in every single meeting that we've had is this need to really address systemic racism and have that sort of as the lens we all this.
Hey, Tiffany, can I interrupt for just a moment? I don't know if it's Tiffany or someone else who has their mic on, going through drawers or ruffling some other paper. Could you make sure that you're on mute while Tiffany's presenting, please? Thank you.
Thank you. And then one other thing that we also just kept an eye on is kind of metrics and figuring out how to measure these things and how to be able to report back to the community on how we're doing. In terms of, I love having Anna scrolling for me and highlighting points. This is great. So in terms of the why, these three different tiers kind of align with different levels of prevention. And so the top kind of brownish bar is what we would refer to as primary prevention, and that is kind of looking more at root causes, things like systemic racism, healthy relationships, affordable housing, getting people out of poverty, all of the things that you see in that top row. These are really upstream solutions, and this is one of the areas that it's usually very difficult to get funding for. I mean, all three of these levels, it's hard to get sustainable funding, but especially the top one, because it takes a long time to see direct impacts in this work, because we're addressing really ingrained problems. And so if you look at the green bar, it'll help us address these kind of specific issues, and this is sort of secondary prevention. And then the third blue bar is tertiary prevention, and that's kind of the immediate need. You know, this would be the buildings that Jason was talking about, getting people actively into some kind of shelter today, getting people into treatment today. And those things are critical, and they will prevent deaths, and we need to focus on them. But we also have this very unique opportunity to look up at the green and the brown bars to think about what else we can do with sustainable funding to really put some things in place that will help reduce the need for things in the blue bar in years to come. You know, if we do a really good job of focusing upstream and addressing these root causes that we know are kind of shared, these are risk factors for a lot of things that the alcohol tax revenue should be looking at. Not only substance use disorder, but also child abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, homelessness. A lot of these things are both cause and effect of the root causes in that brown bar. And so we really want to be mindful and try to find ways to put some of the funding upstream as well. So just to kind of say that, especially for folks who maybe don't work in prevention and use the different primary, secondary, tertiary language all the time. Thank you, Anna. We can scroll down a little bit. And so this is our draft logic model, and it's become a very large document. It started as one page, but with the wonderful feedback we've been getting from the community, it's now a page and a half, and we have a handful of new things to add to it just after our conversations yesterday and today. So this will continue to expand and grow. And this is sort of the framework that we would want to use and that we would hope that the Assembly and administration use when thinking about this funding, to consider. So on the far left, all of the different resources, these are things that already exist in the community that we should be thinking of, outside of just where different kind of buckets of money might be. These are other resources that exist. And then there's a row for activities, and then the outcomes, both short and long-term outcomes. And so that's just a very high level of the logic model, and you can see that there are a lot of activities in here, and we don't anticipate the revenue from the alcohol tax being able to address all of these, but we do think that they are all really important and should eventually be addressed by various funding sources. So in these meetings that we've had yesterday and today, we tried to separate out into kind of the three buckets of the alcohol tax, the public safety, the prevention of DVSA, CA, and then homelessness and substance use and mental health disorders, to get to some more specifics on this. And we asked people to prioritize, and we are still trying to go through all of those notes. I will say, again, just to repeat this, that we want to do everything through a lens of anti-racism, of being really trauma-informed and healing-centered, because we know that a lot of the issues that we're trying to address both cause and affect trauma, and oftentimes the way that we react to these issues can cause further trauma, and so we really want to try to avoid that. And so, for example, in the public safety bucket, a lot of what we were talking about were different non-police responses to behavioral health needs, some of which might include social workers, but some of which might include more culturally appropriate responses. We also talked about community review boards and for the police and equity dialogues. For the second bucket, we talked a lot about what it meant to prevent some of these issues like child maltreatment. And we know that it means promoting healthy families and especially focusing on the first years of life. And so there were various options with thoughts on how to leverage private dollars and which specific programs might be best, and which domestic violence and sexual assault prevention and treatment programs are evidence-based in other places that we know work, and where can the dollars kind of go the furthest, while also trying to keep an eye toward innovation and thinking of things that we haven't tried yet, because we still have these issues, so we need to be thinking of these solutions. And then in the third bucket, we talked about how to potentially use it as launch funding for different substance use disorder treatment programs that are identified in the 1115 waiver, especially because a lot of those potentially could be self-sustaining once they get off the ground as billable services. We also talked about funding for some engagement centers, for daytime centers, funding for existing campuses, and again, how to leverage private sector funding. So I'm glad I know I heard that from Jason as well. Those are sort of the top level things that we talked about, and I'm going to ask my colleagues to kind of help fill in what I've missed, and then, just turn it over.
Thanks, Tiffany. This is Thea. Katie and I have a couple slides on the Crisis Now model that we can share, although unfortunately both of us have other commitments around 12:30. So maybe we could just quickly do that, and then if there's more interest from the commission, we could set up a separate time, and we can also just share the slides. So, Trevor, did you want to say something before we jump over to that?
keep my screen off.
No? Go for it.
Great, okay.
Till
And Katie, do you have a couple minutes right now? Do you want to just quickly, I'll pull up the slides on my screen.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Thea. Just a brief introduction, and then Thea, I think I'll just pass it to you, and you can just walk through it real quick. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate the time today. The trust has been very engaged with our partners on looking for potential solutions to improve how our community and other communities respond to individuals in mental health and drug and alcohol crisis. This particular model, it is a model. It doesn't prescribe how programs necessarily have to clinically operate, but it basically creates a parallel system to our emergency health care system, which is people have immediate access to services like our 911 system. And I apologize that I have to go, but I just do want to say that we have resources on the Trust website. You see the link there. As Thea mentioned, we're happy to do a more in-depth presentation when there's time. Thanks, everybody. Go ahead, Thea.
Thanks, Katie. Start my camera real quick. Okay, and can everyone see this slide on the screen?
It says implementing a behavioral health crisis system of care.
Perfect. Okay. Essentially, as Katie said, this is really a framework, and the goal of it is that we would have available to everyone in Anchorage, and really the project that the Trust is supporting right now will work in Anchorage, Mat-Su, and Fairbanks, so we'll be working with all three communities. But the goal is to be able to have access to a parallel system that will respond appropriately to people in behavioral health crisis, much in the same way that you would expect to have available to you for any kind of physical health emergency. So the Crisis Now framework includes the components that you see on that bottom row. The first is a crisis call center. This is staffed by behavioral health clinicians. It operates 24/7, similarly to how a 911 call center would work, and it's able to both de-escalate and address people's crisis on the phone. It's able to connect them with community resources, whether that's an outpatient appointment or looking for some kind of inpatient bed. But if it can't, if the crisis can't be resolved through that phone connection, the crisis call center is also able to dispatch a mobile team to, again, 24/7 anywhere in the community, just in the same way that 911 might dispatch an ambulance. And that team is composed of a behavioral health clinician and then ideally a peer worker, so somebody who has lived experience with behavioral health crises. That team is able to go anywhere in the community, whether that's a school, a workplace, a home, or someone on the street, and again tries to address the crisis where the person is. If they're not able to resolve the crisis, they're then able to take that person to what's called a stabilization center. That really includes two different components. One is a shorter term 23-hour stabilization center. Again, this is staffed with both medical, psychiatric, behavioral health personnel, as well as peers. And in this model, you basically don't have beds, you have recliners instead. And the goal is to address the person's immediate needs and connect them to the resources they need to resolve the crisis. And then again, if the person's needs are not able to be met in that 23-hour space, there's the fourth component, which is a short-term inpatient bed. And that is usually an average length of stay of between 3 and 7 days. And again, is able to hopefully address the person's needs and return them safely to the community. So that's the goal of the project broadly. Part of what has been so effective about this in other communities is that currently in the United States, we really rely on the police, on law enforcement, and EMS to address behavioral health crisis. So if you have someone in your family who is suicidal, probably you're going to call 911, and probably the person who will come is either an ambulance or a police officer or both. And so what then ends up happening is that law enforcement officer has to figure out where to take the person for help. And because we also don't really have appropriate facilities to serve their needs, sometimes that person ends up driving around in the back of the car with the officer. Sometimes they're taken to an emergency department and there's often long waits and the police officer has to remain there with the person. And then sometimes people end up in jail. So part of the purpose of this model and the success of it is to really change the response from a police-led response to a peer and clinician-led response to crisis. And ultimately, that will it will allow police officers to do the work they're most trained to do. It will remove people in behavioral health crisis from being put in jail, and it will also relieve emergency departments from trying to provide supports that they don't have great access to. So the partners are really the trust, the department. Agnubex we competed for a contract to support this work. We have a 2-year contract with a 1-year option for extension, and we'll be working with the communities of Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Mat-Su. And what we'll be providing is really project management support throughout, and some of the important parts of our work is to help those community work groups that we'll be supporting develop really clear program plans and business models for each of these services. And we've already begun that work. We've already started to develop a financial model based on volumes we expect in Anchorage, based on various different potential reimbursement models for the services. And we'll be sharing the sort of preliminary findings of those models at our first Anchorage work group meeting, which will happen in early August. We're also going to be working with the what we're calling the project management team, which is a state-level team, and that will include many different departments of state government. Of course, Department of Health and Social Services, Public Safety, Labor and Workforce Development, Corrections. The Mat-Su Health Foundation is a big partner, and that level of work will be seeking to address and remove the system-level barriers to making this model effective. So there's work to be done in terms of our involuntary commitment statutes, involuntary medication. There's work to be done in terms of getting feasible reimbursement rates for the services. We know we need to continue to develop the peer workforce and other behavioral health workers. And then we also will be focusing on how to connect this work to rural communities. So I think with that, I want to share the schedule, which is where we got up and underway in March, right as COVID began. So between March and now, we've really been getting organized, getting that project management team set up. We've been convening small meetings with partners in Mat-Su, Fairbanks, and Anchorage. We've begun the Mat-Su work group, working primarily with their CIT coalition. We've been actively engaging our tribal partners in all of those communities to make sure that they're co-leading the work. And as I mentioned, we're already in the middle of the business modeling. So between now and October, we'll be doing a series of 3 meetings with the community work groups to really define the community level plans and to continue with the business modeling. And the goal is to have services at least starting in kind of a pilot fashion in early 2021. He's the best contact, and as you mentioned, that web address right there will give you all sorts of information about the model that we'd love you to look at, and feel free to share. And again, if the commission would like a longer presentation or discussion of this, please let us know, and we'd be happy to meet with you again at a different time.
All right, thank you. Thanks for all this conversation. I think we've got a lot to probably got to have a lot of discussion here that we can fit into our short remaining time, because we have a little bit of other business to discuss before 1 o'clock as well. But so what, we're hearing from, I think, a couple different ideas and approaches, and there's a lot here as far as the optimal use of the alcohol tax funds, going back to operating support that Jason was talking about, the logic model and theory of change work, and including Crisis Now. So that the need and the programs that might meet the need that are very well thought through are also, I have to believe, there's more here than we can really fund with alcohol tax and with even with some amount of leverage and other support. So what's the there's going to end up being, whether it's ideal or not, some level of prioritization where we say we'll fund this but not this, and what is that going to need to be? And so is prioritization with those constraints a part of this conversation for whoever might be able to answer?
Yeah, thanks so much. This is Tiffany. We did start bringing up prioritization in our meetings this week, knowing that everything is worthy and important, but that, like you said, we can't fund everything. And we know that we are working to get the Assembly some exact dollar amount recommendations by July 24th. Hopefully before that, because they have their work session, the next work session on the alcohol tax that day. So we will be working really hard to get these recommendations from all of our subject matter experts together with specific dollar amounts, and ideally some metrics.
Thank you for that. Let's see. I'd like to open it up. And Lance, actually, before we get deeper into questions, how much time do we need to conserve for our other business with the departmental budgets?
5 minutes for everything that I have.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's hear what questions folks have. Use the hand raising feature or the chat if you can, or if you're on the phone, just go ahead and blurt out your question.
So, Nolan, I think Carla had a first question as it relates to Jason regarding the community councils, and I think that was the first question that we saw pop up as these presentations started. So if you maybe want to start there.
Yeah, go ahead, Carla.
Guys, I'm mute and I'm eating. I was just wondering if they had approached the community councils in the areas of these three properties to see what their response was regarding purchasing the properties, the meaning of purchasing the properties.
Yes, this is Jason. We actually had a hour and a half meeting last night with the Spenard Community Council that I also believe they invited members of the Turnagain Community Council to attend. So we spent quite a bit of time last night talking about the America's Best Value Inn with them. From my perspective, I thought it went very well. It seemed like there was, support for it from them, though there was no formal vote. I don't think it was kind of a formal Spenard Community Council meeting by the president of the Community Council. And then this evening, we are also giving a presentation to Midtown residents, and I don't think it is a community council hosted meeting. I believe this is something that both Felix and Meg have put together. So residents of Midtown will be able to hear the same presentation. And then last week we had our first work session with the Assembly where we ran through all of this, and I believe that there were quite a few folks from the public that had attended. And then we have a second work session with the Assembly this coming Friday for another hour to continue to present on this and answer questions. So, yes, we are hitting as many folks as we possibly can.
Okay, let's see. And other more questions for any of our guests? I'm sure some of you have some.
Actually, this is Carla. I have a second question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair. The CARES Act, is this actually, you were talking about funding from the CARES Act to buy these properties. Is this actually part of what the CARES Act covers?
Yes, we fully believe that this is a fully eligible expense under the CARES Act.
Okay, but you say you fully believe, so it is laid out in how the CARES Act is written, that it does cover things like this, rather than helping business owners or people who have been displaced or financially burdened by the shutdown.
Yes.
Okay, we've got Tasha has her hand up. Go ahead, Tasha.
Yeah, I am really impressed with the location spots for the proposed new housing and resource centers. And I guess I was curious how much renovation there might need to be to accommodate that type of housing, especially considering cozy and comfort, as I think of hotels and all of the carpet versus how to keep something really clean. Maybe not so much carpet and those kind of amenities that are a little bit more challenging to clean. And also thinking of the homeless people that I know that are homeless and choosing not to stay in any of the shelters because of bed bugs. I'm just curious, how much thought has been put into that, or is that just all part of the RFP and not going to worry about it at this stage? But I think that that's something that I would consider, is how much work would need to go into to make sure that this is a place where the homeless people would like to stay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, and something that we have had conversations with the coalition and Jasmine about. I will answer kind of the renovation question first, which is to say that many of the rooms at the America's Best Value Inn are, a lot of them have already been fully renovated over the last couple of years, to the point where they have new flooring, they have kitchenettes, some of them are double occupancy rooms that have actually full kitchens. So a lot of the renovations on these actual rooms have already been done. Are there some rooms that will likely need some minor renovations to potentially add, a kitchenette or something that allows folks to stay there on a longer-term basis? Yes. But I think a lot of the renovations that we are potentially discussing right now, and again, I think part of this is going to be informed once we actually do have an operator on board, is the actual kind of office space. So the front office rooms and the larger conference rooms, I think there will be a lot of discussion around what type of renovations do we need there to make sure that we accommodate all of the different partners that we have, that we would want to have on site, to make sure that we are providing all of the resources necessary for the individuals that are staying there.
Okay, thank you, Jason. You started to, I think we're sort of touching on this a bit, but the operating model for the facilities, these would be municipal run or municipal owned, third party operated, correct? That's what's being talked about?
Yes, we would own the building, but then we would turn over the operation of the building to a third party that is awarded the contract through the RFP process.
And so programmatically, the municipality is still the one responsible for either leveraging or sourcing the operating funds. It's not simply that the operator might be a nonprofit organization that brings their own funding to the table or brings their own operating model in terms of revenue.
Well, that's not 100% true. I think that there will be some amount of that the operator would likely bring to the table. Part of the $7 million cost that we are estimating is those costs that are not covered through all of the other traditional ways that we currently see facilities like this being covered. So, for example, a lot of costs associated with a treatment center are potentially covered by Medicaid or private insurance. That's not included in the costs that we were putting out there. In terms of like the America's Best Value, there's the opportunity for us to work with the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation and hopefully receive vouchers for people to stay there that would not come out of that kind of pool that we were talking about that the municipality would ultimately be responsible for potentially. So that is something that we would want to work with whoever is chosen as the operator, because again, they probably bring a significant amount of experience in dealing with those issues, and we would want to take advantage of that to make sure that we have we're actually identifying and going after all of the different funding opportunities that are typically available to these types of facilities.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm sure we've got more questions from the AC members. Anybody else? Let's see. Not hearing from anyone else so far. I did want to comment that the Crisis Now model, behavioral health crisis response. I really want to applaud the thinking behind, introducing a program like that here in the municipality. I think that in one of our recent meetings, I shared with you guys some data that I had crunched showing how public safety spending, like on a real per capita basis in Anchorage, has grown. And all other spending, in departments has really declined in real terms if you look at it, on a per capita basis. And so I think bottom line with that is that I think that we're tending to put a lot more money into public safety, for responses that could be dealt with in better ways as we've starved some of our social services, and they've just not really kept up with the rate of inflation and the increasing loads that are placed on them. And so I really think that there's a lot of promise to that type of approach. I'm certainly interested.
That reminded me of a quick question I had.
Yeah.
So with the Crisis Now model, with dispatching, the peer model that Tiffany explained, and by the way, thank you everyone for those presentations. Those are really helpful and informative. But has there been any data on any kind of like an offset to public safety by employing the peer approach for kind of like the mental health calls?
This is Anna Brawley with Agnew Beck. So I'm definitely not the most qualified person to answer that question, but I can have our team follow up. And I know certainly, I don't have specific numbers, but I know that the cost considerations are important, and there'd be opportunities to shift that funding or be more efficient. And I know another cost that's maybe hard to quantify in terms of dollars, but just the presence of behavioral health patients in hospital emergency departments, as well as obviously the criminal justice system. But hospitals are also not really equipped to handle, or not specially trained to handle, behavioral health emergencies as much as they are medical emergencies. And so that's another kind of cost to the community to consider is, how much it impacts the healthcare system as well. But I can ask our team to follow up.
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing that.
And maybe Lance or Jason have a thought on this, but I think that I've heard the police chief say that there's some some large proportion of calls that are in fact more mental health related, or that are really not ideal for police to be responding to, but there really isn't another choice. And I think I'm broadly right about that. That it's a significant share.
I would say yes, it is, and I would also say it's also for the fire department as well. I think when Chief Hetrick presented some of the ideas she had for how to address some of the issues that are facing the fire department, they had a somewhat related program. I think it was called the CORE team, and it was made of individuals, medic, behavioral health, maybe a social worker. I can't remember all of the ingredients, so one of the things that's come to my mind is there's a lot of synergy about the need and basically similar combinations of people with expertise to help address some of the behavioral health issues. I had a question here for maybe Thea. In the model, one of the last presentation slides that you had, we had sort of a medical response and a behavioral health response. Do you know if Chief Dahl or anybody from APD has seen or is aware of the thinking that you've got presented there?
Thanks, Lance. This is Anna Brawley again, because I know Thea had to step out.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I'm aware that they've definitely been meeting and working directly with Chief Dahl and especially Deputy Chief McCoy. And my understanding is APD has been very interested and potentially supportive of this model.
Great. Thank you very much.
Good. Let's see unless anyone has another quick question, we may have to move on to our final bit of business before we adjourn. So, looks like nobody's jumped there. Then I really want to thank all of our guests today. These are huge topics with huge importance, and I think we obviously have some really smart people with a lot of expertise in our community that are tackling them. So I really appreciate all of you that are working in this space on both on the alcohol tax as well as on the issue of the shelters and transitional housing. So I really want to thank all of you and appreciate you guys sharing your information with us. Lance, I'm going to hand things over to you then.
Sure, that'd be great.
To talk about departments.
Yeah, maybe before I get started, Cameron, if you're still on and you want to take a couple minutes to maybe talk about what's going on with the assembly, I'll turn it over to you. Suzanne could not make it. She had an appointment jump up, but I'll turn it over to Cameron for a couple minutes if he wants to enlighten the group on what's going on at the assembly.
I'm sorry, Cameron.
I don't know if he's still with us online. Doesn't look like it, so I'll go ahead and jump in. I think a lot of the things that the Assembly is dealing with, Jason mentioned as it relates to what's going on in their world. As it relates to the alcohol tax, they will be looking at the structure of the tax. They are still having conversations among themselves about the purpose and use of the tax, and I think they are appreciative of the Budget Advisory Commission's time on this matter and inviting our guests to present some of the proposals that they have. I think, frankly, there's a lot of commonality, and I'm glad to see that a lot of the nonprofits are working cooperatively to figure out how they can best meet the needs of the community in the 3 tiers and where to start on those things. So that's great. I really think the administration would appreciate that as well. From the department's perspective, just real quick on the CARES Act funding. We are keeping track of all of the different sources of funds. I won't spend a lot of time on it. We are getting from the state funding the $22.5 million that Jason mentioned. That is part of the money from the state portion of the CARES funding, the $156 million. We've also passed an ordinance with the Assembly's or resolution. Additional support to small businesses, to parks and recreation, and to a variety of other programs. I'll forward a copy of that to the members. So that's also CARES money. As far as the 2020 budget, we're really looking at supporting those individuals and businesses that are struggling right now, as well as creating some economic opportunity in places that we can with the CARES Act funds. On the 2020 budget, right now, I will have something going to the Assembly as the controller is closing year end and the months January, February, March. We have an accurate reflection of where we ended in the first quarter. At the end of first quarter, we were about 25% spent on our labor. We were about 27% spent, or 20% spent. And our non-labor, we were a little bit more than that. Spent was down, but we've encumbered a lot of money. So overall, the departments are on track. We have a couple of them that are running a little hot. One of them is the health department. That's to be expected. But the others, so far, they look pretty good on the expenditure side. On the revenue side, Treasury is going to be presenting a revenue projection for the rest of the year. Right now, based on their projections, including bed tax, investments, department revenues, we're looking at a shortfall of roughly $16 million in revenue out of about $700 million in total. Of the $700 million, $500 million of that is in support of general government. So we're definitely being mindful of how we're going to work the opportunities in the CARES Act funds to sort of address some of those shortfalls where we possibly can. We know that 2020 is going to be a challenge as we get to the end of the year. For 2021, we are diligently working on the capital budget. OMB has received all of the submissions from the departments. We are looking at those right now internally before we share them with the executive team and the mayor. We'll be sharing a preliminary review of those with the Planning and Zoning Commission in August, and then the administration will be making some decisions shortly thereafter, and we'll get our capital budget prepared probably in the end of August. On the operating budget, we sent out guidance to departments. I think I might have sent the message that I sent to departments to the Budget Advisory Commission members. If not, I will send that to you. Their submissions are due to us on July 20th. I know a couple departments will be submitting a little bit later, maybe in a day or two because of staffing coordination they have on their end. So we're looking forward to that. And the last matter I have is I appreciate everyone on the Budget Advisory Commissioner's response to my request to coordinate some time with directors. I think we're rapidly putting those together. Many of you have some times already scheduled that Lila has sent to you. For those that we haven't done, I know Carla, we got to set yours up. Thank you for your ability to be flexible. I've heard from Parks and Planning, so we've got something lined up. Alyssa is not on, but I think we've got the port lined up, and I think the only one we need to secure right now is Jonathan with finance, but we are looking to get that lined up for Jonathan. So all's looking very well. I appreciate your support there. Again, if you have any questions as those meetings are being set up, as you read the material, reach out to me, and I will help you address those. The departments I've spoke with are all looking forward to the conversations. I've sort of built it as a learning experience for them and for you, and really just trying to get a little bit more in-depth knowledge about some segments of the municipal budget by department as you'll be looking at our 21 budget in September, so September and October. So that's all I have for an update, and our next meeting is scheduled for August 6th. If the Budget Advisory Commission would like to have another special meeting on the alcohol tax as material gets finalized or gets presented, as those things come together, Mr. Chairman, you can make me aware of those, or I will do the reciprocal and see if we need to do a doodle poll if you want to have another meeting. I don't know if in July is timely, but possibly in August. So I think that is all. That's all I have for you. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you for that, Lance. I think we may want to gauge the group's interest on work sessions, because I think we've got a lot on us right now, and I'm not sure whether people are more interested in the CARES Act discussion or the alcohol tax as far as like our work session bandwidth and attention span goes. They're obviously both huge issues. So I think maybe we should feel out the group about which of those we want to focus on. But I do believe we should do a work session, in order to weigh in on these important issues.
We can. I'll ask Lila to send out not really a poll, but just a request, and folks can get to us about their level of interest right away. And I can also share with you when I think the timing of the CARES Act discussion and the alcohol tax discussion might be most beneficial, so that you are responsive in the right time. I will do that.
Sure. Yes, that'd be perfect. Thank you, Liz.
I want to thank you guys. This was a full-packed agenda. It's a lot. There's a lot of material coming in, so thank you for your attention and your time, and I very much appreciate it.
Okay, and thank you, Lance. You've obviously put a lot of legwork into this, plus the departmental meetings. You and Lila both. So huge thanks to you, both of you. And with that, let's see. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
This is Lindsay. I move to adjourn.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you very much. And with that, then, I think we are adjourned. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, Linda.
Yep, thank you.